Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. I'm Leela Jacinto, and joining us in our studio today is Mr. Gilles Kepel, a leading scholar of Islam and the contemporary Arab world, and a professor here at Sciences Po Paris. Mr. Kepel is also a prolific author of several books, including his latest, Passion Arabe. There's no English edition yet, but for those of you who read French, it's a very accessible book, very different from Mr. Kepel's other works, much more of a personal travelogue of his journeys in the region from 2011 to 2013. Mr. Kepel, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure.
As I mentioned, this book is very different from your other works, a personal travelogue. Why did you opt for this style?
Well, it's different and always it's more or less the same because it's always the same matter. I mean, I'm discussing what happens in the Arab world in it. But I thought that, you know, when we had those revolutions taking place, it was important for someone like me who had traveled for the last 40 years in the region, who met with so many people, who made so many friends, and who also made some enemies, to go back there and to take a sort of first-hand account of what was taking place. Because, you know, all our categories of understanding of this universe were changing, they were challenged. So it was important to go back and to have a sort of eyewitness account of all that. And as I'm not a journalist, I went there, but I also tried to put it into perspective and to compare what I saw with my 4 decades of experience, 40 years of experience in the region. And this is what made the book a personal account also, because you know, you have to understand what is the prism for you to see what happens, and the way I saw it is very much dependent on whom I knew, how I was educated, the languages which I know, the networks that I had, and this, I believe, is part and parcel of what makes us understand, you know, a revolution in the making, because it's much too early to draw lessons of this phenomenon, because we're in the middle of it.
Right. In light of that, you're probably not going to like what I'm going to ask you, but having traveled in the region for 4 decades, can I ask you, you know, 2 years after the outbreaks of the uprisings, is there an overarching mood across the region, or is it really too diverse to talk about an overarching mood? Because people really want to understand the Arab world as a totality now.
Well, both. I mean, it's both very diverse, and you know, in Tunisia, in Libya, and in Egypt, the ancien regimes were toppled because domestic issues were more important than international issues for those 3 countries. Whatever happens in Tunisia, the barrel price, the oil barrel price, will not move, if you wish. Whereas in Bahrain or in Yemen, which are 2 countries within the Arabian Peninsula, whatever change, whatever revolution takes place politically has immediate consequences economically. Therefore, aborting the Bahrain revolution was something which was performed by Saudi and other GCC troops without many people in the OECD and the oil-consuming countries paying too much attention, because they felt it was an issue for them. And also in Syria, something that started as the other revolutions, i.e. against authoritarianism, against dictatorship, for freedom, for dignity, for social justice, and so on and so forth, was taken hostage both by the fragmentation of Syria into a number of different sects and denominations, Sunnis, Alawis, Christians, Druzi, what have you, and also was taken hostage at the regional level of the big fight between the Sunni petro-monarchies of the GCC, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and what have you, and Iran, on the other hand, which is Shia and Persian, in order to control or to have hegemony over the Gulf and over the exporting of the hydrocarbons from the Gulf. But nevertheless, there is this overarching mood, which is the fact that the Arabs, after so many years, during which they were subdued by the regimes that had taken power, confiscated power after independence from the colonial powers, nowadays they have seized freedom of speech. And, you know, and this is something which will not escape. Whatever happens, whatever the vagaries and the difficulties and of the process.
Right.
So it's a process in the making, and this is this process in the making that I wanted to show and to analyze and to understand in the book.
Right. There's one thing that I really want to understand is, you know, you mentioned this, on the one hand, the Islamist elements, Salafist or Brotherhood, and the GCC, the Gulf monarchies. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're hearing, you know, reports of Qatar supporting the Brotherhood, some reports of Saudis supporting Salafist. And then on the other hand, you have the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, which seems to be cracking down on a local group, al-Islah, which is a Brotherhood group. What is the relationship within that Islamist rubric and their Gulf sponsors?
Well, there are two things. On the wider picture, the oil monarchies were panic-stricken when the revolutions started, because, you know, freedom, democracy, social justice. I mean, you don't have to paint the picture for you, and the nightmare of the sheikhdoms and oildoms and what have you was you have 90 million Egyptians crossing the Red Sea and going to seize the oil rigs in the oil fields in Saudi Arabia, and simultaneously would have the same amount of Iranians crossing the Persian Gulf. And therefore, they were eager to deflect the furor of the revolutions towards another enemy. And this enemy was to become Iran, right? Who is, of course, a big challenger to their power, and who's vying for hegemony on the Gulf. So that's one thing. But within this sort of wider opposition between Sunni and Shia, which is becoming the sort of outcome of the Arab revolutions on the regional level, you have differences between the competing GCC countries. For instance, Qatar, which is a very small country, where there's a very large gas exporting country, very small in population. I mean, the indigenous population of Qatar is approximately 200,000 people. Therefore, they need support. They need masses to support them. And they boosted the Muslim Brothers wherever. Al Jazeera, the Qatar chain.
And the UAE does not like this.
No, not at all. And nor do the Saudis, actually.
Why are the Saudis, and who are they supporting? What game are they playing?
The Saudis are supporting, first and foremost, the Salafists. And they probably supported them to play a more prominent political role in Egypt, because hadn't they done it, then the Muslim Brothers would have swam the whole political scene in Egypt. So, and when there were elections, parliamentary elections, the brothers got a majority, but the Saudis, the Salafis, which is more or less the same, got a sort of 25% amount of the votes and of the members of parliament. So it allowed them to have some leverage, if you
Right. So is the Brotherhood in competition with the Salafists in the new Arab world then?
Of course, yeah. There's within the Islamist dimension of the political scope, there is a strong Salafi, Saudi-backed versus brothers, Qatar-backed fight for influence. But things have become more and more complex, because within Egypt, for instance, the Salafists have exploded into a number of competing factions. Within the brothers, you have now stronger positions between the older generation, the sort of apparatus people, on the one hand, and the younger generation, who feels much closer to the sort of liberal youth of Tahrir Square, right? And this leads, add to that the fact that the brothers are now in power in Egypt, and then they became desacralized. And they have to put their hands in the gutter and to deal with the bread and butter issue, and they're not very good at it. And therefore, that leads to a sort of third phase of those revolutions, where you have a reaction against those who had the means to control the votes because they had those strong organizations that would deliver.
Right. We're running out of time, but I cannot let this finish without talking about Syria. Some interesting developments. President Assad basically talking into the worst fears of the US and Europe by saying, by supporting the rebels, it's going to be another Afghanistan. On the other hand, the EU contemplating lifting of the oil embargo. Where are we heading on Syria and how long?
Now, things are far more complicated because originally in Syria, it started just like it started in Tunisia against authoritarianism and what have you. But then because the opposition was facing a brutal repression and had no weapons, and when they started the sort of armed revolt, the Free Syrian Army, they did not get the military backing that they wanted from outside. The ones who filled that void were the Salafists and the jihadists that were on the payroll of the radical Sunnis coming from the Gulf monarchies, whether private or public. And this has boosted the sort of Salafi jihadi dimension within the Syrian opposition, which is not limited to that. You know, you have a number of secularists, for instance, particularly amongst the army officers that defected. But as of now, there is this competition between the three forces, and this helps us understand why the Assad regime, which everybody thought would be washed away, still is resilient because he uses the divisions between his oppositions.
But I'm afraid that's all we have time for. But thank you for joining us. And that's it for this edition of The Interview. Do stay with us at France 24.